I get the impetus for like local first, right? And I also like it. I like the idea that like it doesn't matter if stuff goes offline. I don't like being beholden to remote infrastructure that could stop working at any moment, all this kind of stuff.
I like it as a consumer, not as a developer.
Butterscotch.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 437 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the miscellaneous programmer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artist.
And this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. Today is Spooktober 13th, Friday the 13th to be more specific.
Oh, yeah,
20 Jubilee.
We really can't let that fact go. You know, it's important to just take a second, note the fact. Spookiest month, October. Spookiest day, 13th. Spookiest combo of day and week, Friday the 13th. All at the same fucking time.
Ooh.
Yeah, also profanity warning. We're going to have profanity, and
Shit.
we already did.
Yep. It's adding to the spook factor that you don't know it's coming. It's like a...
Yeah, I always try to get that warning in before anybody says anything because the first sentence after the intro always has something in it. Even if there isn't anything for like 10 more minutes, it's always like right off the bat.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's in the psyche. It's somewhere deep in there. It's like it's pent up.
I think it's because we're all thinking about the profanity warning, which just kind of puts it front and center.
Yes.
It's
I think that's
the
right.
whole don't think of an elephant thing, you know, so that my brain's just like a series of fucks and shit.
It's like, shit. Anyways, we'd also like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for your recurring donations to help keep our microphones doing sound capture stuff.
Yeah, we really shouldn't
Let's
have
talk-
bought those microphones that you have to slide $1 into every time you want to use them. That was probably...
Well, but they were free, so I mean,
yeah, I guess
don't do the
free in
math.
that sense. Yeah.
we got the free to play microphones where you can just you can get the microphone for free, no problem.
It does play ads randomly though. Just
and you got to buy a lot of mic gems that you can then swap out for audio coins, which is that. Well, we don't need to get into the exchange rates, but like
that's really convoluted.
It basically comes out to $63 per episode per microphone. Yep. But that's considering it was free up front, I feel like that's a pretty good deal.
Yeah, great, solid.
So, yeah.
I mean, at some point that's going to happen, right? Someone's going to sell an ad-supported microphone for podcasting where it just auto injects ads like.
Well, so
as you're
have we talked about the heated seat subscription on the podcast?
Sounds like this
We
is
must
just a
have.
subscription model creeping into everything.
Okay, well, I've been following this story for a long time because it's just so fucking stupid.
Yeah, it's one of the things I hate more than almost anything.
So the deal was, I think it was Mercedes, BMW,
BMW, I think.
So they were like, we have heated seats, but sometimes our customers don't buy a heated seat. Okay, because when you buy your car, you can spring for the extra things. Well, if you're buying a BMW, you're not pinching pennies. Okay. You're looking to spend a whole bunch of money for absolutely no fucking reason because it's a car. It just drives around. It doesn't do any better of a job than any other car to do the job of being a car. So you're just spending money to,
They do have a really
right?
good safety record. I'm going to give them that in terms of
things. They are good
wonder.
cars.
Yeah,
they're good cars. You can't say that it's the same as like a just like a jalopy that you buy.
Sure, it's not the same. It's not the same. But
it'll get you from point A to point B. Sure, yeah, but it is. It just doesn't mean it's an equivalent experience.
Yeah, and the financial difference is not, in my opinion, proportional to the change in utility.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
So what they found was that people who bought a BMW 90% of the time would also buy the heated seats. Right. So BMW's over here like, hey, we're spending all this time manufacturing two different kinds of seats.
It also means you're trying to predict like how many, because you make the cars ahead of time.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, well, because then you end up with like a surplus of one or the other. And also you have to have your factory configured to make two different kinds of seats. And like, actually, it would be cheaper for us if we just only made heated seats. Mm-hmm. Right.
So
like
let's just
logistically.
do that, and let's just raise the base price a little
So let's do that. But this is where they pulled a unity. Okay, where they were
because
like,
they could have just been like they could have been a selling point, which is just every car has heated.
They could have just been like, our cars have heated seats now.
We're not going to penny pinch you on whether or not you're going to every single goddamn, like, it is the thing when you're getting a car and like the list of options you can apply is just this endless parade of like, how good do you want your experience to be in this thing? You know,
just
And
1,000
I love the
episodes.
idea of them just saying, which is what they should have, you know, just like, hey, you just get to have
All of
a
our
good
cars have heated
experience.
seats.
That's
now.
just how it
but
works.
They decided not to do that because of this thing called enshittification, which is a word that's coming up more and more, which I love. Which is that once a business reaches a certain level of saturation of the market, it just turns its products into shit. While trying to extract as much cash from them as possible in shitification.
Natural consequence of the design of capitalism.
Yeah, because you can't grow forever, which means at some point you're stuck with the customer base you have, and then you just gotta
Exploit,
just
exploit,
do
exploit.
whatever you can to keep making more profits. So BMW was like, how do we enshitify this move to always have heated seats? And they said, well, 10% of people don't want heated seats, which is not true. Everybody wants heated seats. Just 10% of people didn't spring for them.
Yeah,
right?
they don't want to pay for it. Is
Yeah.
what they-
So they were like, well, we still want to give consumers the options that we gave them before. So we will
yes.
still install the heated seats in every car, but we will disable them unless you pay us a monthly subscription.
That's what I got. That's what messed me up because I was like, it'd be one thing if you said it's technically in there and then you pay to like
Enable
turn it
it.
on or something, right?
Even
Yeah,
that's fucked
still
up.
I mean, that's
fucked up
already
and
fucked up. Don't get me wrong.
absurd.
That's already fucked up. But monthly,
Yeah, that's where it really jumped the
Is-
shark on
Yeah,
that one.
which means you have an always online car. Like,
Yeah.
like your car has to check in with us like a payment processor or some shit. Like it has to hook into the database. So now it's like, all right, well, in order to say like do this heated seat thing, they had to add all this other shit to sort of like have some kind of a subscription API and billing process and whatever else. I mean,
Every year
they
that
ended up
that
they
my-
ended up canceling it after a while.
Yeah, I mean they had
Recently.
to. It was just so stupid. Man. Every year that my 2009 two-door Ford Focus with no bells or whistles
Literally, it's got no cruise control.
Doesn't have cruise
got
control.
window
a
cranks.
manual. It doesn't have window cranks. It does have. It
Oh,
does
that's
have
right. Yeah,
electric windows because that's the
Yeah,
one
yeah.
thing where it's like that's one level too absurd for my
whoa there, luxury boy.
experience. You know?
Does it have power locks?
If by which you mean you can push a button, the locks go up and down. Yes.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, okay. You got everything you need.
It's
then.
got
What are
what
you
it
talking
needs. It's got a radio in it, you know. So that's cool.
AC
I
that
think
works.
I think it even has a CD player. So
about? It does.
which
yeah.
is pretty dope.
retro.
Very retro. But yeah, but every single year, I actually just like my old ass car more because I keep hearing about all the newfangled car stuff that's happening. I keep seeing pictures of like the interiors of these cars. They're cool. They look like spaceships, right? All these new cars that are coming out. But everything is a fucking flat screen, you know?
Everything
Like-
is a flat screen
and I'm like,
and is
how do
hooked
you
to a
just-
subscription.
in a subscription service and like you have to like call somebody to get access to your vehicle or whatever because they can lock it remotely.
I got a fun thing on because I had to get a new car because my Ford Focus just totally died, right? And there's this fun feature in my new car where it has a flat screen thing in it because you can't get one without it.
Yep.
And whenever I start driving, the flat screen pulls up a big message. It's like, hey, don't look at this flat screen while you're driving. And then it won't show you any other information
I love
unless you
that.
push confirm on it. So I'm like, I wasn't looking at it.
And now
I don't
you
want,
made
and
me,
now I have to.
and you
because-
maybe interact with it, which is the dangerous part.
Yeah, because also like that's where like they have like a rear camera that displays on that thing, and yeah, like you can't see the rear camera because a fucking message pops up. I'm like, what? Anyways,
Who's
let's talk
designing these
about
things?
Hardware buttons are just the best. You know,
give me buttons or
me
give
buttons.
me death.
Yep.
You know, well, preferably buttons.
Buttons.
If I had to choose, I'd
Well,
choose.
but
I'd choose
if it's
buttons.
in a car, if it's in a car, you are choosing buttons or death, and that's the thing, you know. 'cause
That's
probably true.
true, actually.
Yeah.
If you don't have buttons, you're gonna die.
you're
Well,
gonna die. That's the
eventually, but-
consequence. It's just
I mean, yeah, everybody dies at some point.
Death comes for us all. Let's
Yeah.
talk about Microsoft, Activision, Blizzard, King merger news.
How
Okay.
the most important question here is really what are they going to do with this name?
What are they going to do? Okay, I've been thinking about
yeah.
this.
Well,
'cause
first,
this is actually
the news is that the merger has gone ahead.
the merger is finalized. This was hard
This
because
was a gigantic ass, like just the craziest merge.
Yeah, this is
in the history of
Microsoft.
video gamers.
What spending? I mean, who knows what the final result is because the legal questions ought to get answered first, right? But
they did
the idea is that Microsoft is spending $70 billion with a B dollars to buy.
That's not even real money at that point.
No.
That's so much money that it's fake.
It's a lot of 365 subscriptions. So, and there's like money from banks that doesn't even exist because it's been lended out 10 times. Yeah, it's all
none
fake.
of this is real.
None of it's real.
This is just
The scale is too big. But yeah, so ABK, which as you're saying is, I keep wanting to say Abercrombie, but that's not. That's absolutely.
I keep thinking Burger King.
Banana Republic,
and clean.
Kosh Bagosh.
Kosh. Yeah.
Shortened
to Kosh. Yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, ABK, Activision Blizzard King, which is already three companies merged into one. I think it was first Activision Blizzard and then King got added. Is that right?
Yep.
And now Microsoft has bought the whole shebang. So I think this is now an acquisition instead of a merger, right?
I believe it's an acquisition.
Because Microsoft is way bigger, which is why I could buy that whole conglomerate, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's been going on for now they announced it over a year ago. I think it was last summer or something, or spring even.
Trying to get it done.
That they wanted to do it, and then it had to go through regulatory stuff because, of course, if we actually lived in a real place that was trying to prevent monopolies and stuff, this never would have happened in a million years.
Yeah, because this is you've got the entire stack, right? This is Microsoft who manufactures Xboxes, who controls the distribution platform on the Xbox, right? Because it's the online store, and then it's
the operating system for PC,
and
gamers,
the operating system for PC, right? Yeah. And then it's buying $70 billion worth of companies that make some of the leading products that are at the end of the distribution chain, right?
It's a wild.
It's called vertical integration.
It's a big win for them. I'll tell you what. Huge win.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah, and in the short run, it might be a win for all of us.
Oh, it's gonna be great
until enshittification.
Including ABK employees, because ABK, historically and notoriously has been a very employee hostile environment.
So I don't know about King. I don't know. That's true.
You never hear about King.
But yeah, Activision and Blizzard both have had some suboptimal press in recent times.
Way to put it.
Yeah. So this merger, I think the interesting implications of it on like the consumer side is Xbox Game Pass and what's going to happen with all of the games that are under ABK. And whether or not those will be coming to Game Pass, right? So we have things like Overwatch, which I never purchased, or like the Diablo series, World of Warcraft, which is already a subscription. Mm-hmm. So it'd be kind of interesting if they were like, well, it's also in Game Pass. So if you are a Game Pass subscriber, then you're also
Game Pass.
They're gonna put a lot of stuff in there, and if it's not included, it'll be the sort of thing where like you get some, there'll be some bonus thing, right?
Yeah,
where it's like some goodies or whatever every month or something like that. They're definitely going to pull a lot of stuff in the Game Pass because that's their big bet on the future is the subscription service, and then eventually you can see where all it's going with the cloud service stuff, right? It's like I've now played quite a few games on my couch with the cloud Xbox service without having to actually install them. Which I tried playing Starfield, by the way. I was so bored. The opening of that game is so fucking slow. I was like, what is happening? That I quit after about 25 minutes.
Here's a question, though.
So I didn't have to install it for 3 hours, which was great.
Did you have any weed beforehand? I feel like maybe to enjoy it, you need to slow your own brain down a lot, You got to match the pace of the
reaction
game.
Times.
Either be drunk or high, and then you're just like, fuck, this game is crazy.
I can't keep up.
It's so fast.
This cutscene has only been going for 6 hours.
Anyway. It's bad when they make us just walk. You're just walking next to some slow NPCs talking about mining rocks in a beige rock tunnel. And I was like, is this really how we're doing this, folks?
Oh, yeah. So we had
we
had a great Bethesda bug moment this week. Okay, speaking of Bethesda games.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Did you notice? Did you just catch this, Sam?
No.
In our QA chat.
So we've had a user who's been going back and forth with our QA team who has been just having a hell of a time getting Crashlands to run on their computer. Okay. Which is weird because why?
Yeah,
right?
Why should run?
Yeah.
It might,
and
I can imagine it, crashing after runs or all kinds of other scenarios, but like
It should run.
it should start at least. You
yeah.
know?
So whenever somebody has a strange situation like that, our immediate thought is, what did you do? Right? Like
First it's
you had to.
antivirus, and then next it's what did you do? Right.
Next, it's all right. Did you do some kind of do you have some kind of weird shit like running, like cheat software running, or did you hack the game, or what did you do? Right? Because you had to do something. And what it turned out this person had done was they were trying to play one of the Fallout games, but there was some kind of physics bug in that game where I guess like the physics engine is affected by the frame rate.
I think it was Fallout 3 because I also the last time I tried to play Fallout 3 on my modern rig had like a lot of weird technical problems, and I actually just kind of couldn't play it.
Yeah. So if you're playing on a monitor that has like a high refresh rate or something, then apparently like the physics engine just explodes or something. And again, like that's wild that happened because monitors with different refresh rates has always been a thing. So I don't know, but that's in there. And so this guy had installed some software package that essentially like fucks with, it intervenes on some kind of like device level to sort of like send fake data to a game about what your monitor is doing and stuff so that he could play one of these Fallout games. And then he just forgot because it just like apparently it just like boots and just runs in the background. Yeah. And so he had this thing running forever. And then it was fucking with Crashlands, and then he couldn't play Crashlands. So I was like, you've really arrived in the notorious for creating bugs space as a game studio when your bugs actually start adversely affecting other games that you had nothing to do with.
Get your shit together, Bethesda. What is this?
It's very impressive.
Yeah. But yeah, so the merger with Microsoft ABK, it's final now. We'll see what happens with all the Game Pass stuff. I'll be interested to see that. I do think that there's a chance that World of Warcraft ends up in Game Pass because they've been slowly creeping in more like ways for people to spend money that's not part of the subscription.
But the subscription though, because isn't the subscription like it's at least $10 a month, right?
13, yeah,
which is the same,
basically the same as
a Game Pass subscription. Like I can't, and they have like 10 million subscribers or some insane thing, right? Like I can't.
Yeah, but the difference, if you think about it this way, the difference is like if Microsoft's goal is to get people into Game Pass and keep them there, right? So WoW subscribers, they will often subscribe at the start of a season for a few months, and then like once it kind of hits a lull, they've done all the new stuff, then they let their subscription lapse for a while. And then they subscribe again, right? And so I would assume that Microsoft would see that and they'd be like, well, if we can switch that over to a Game Pass subscription, then essentially we give them a huge library of other games to keep playing during those lulls, and they'll just keep paying us a subscription instead of dropping off.
You think they can offset the loss of that $10 a month for 10 million users kind of level of?
Well, it would just be a transition, right? Yeah. So like they would just move the $10 million a month from this pipeline into a different pipeline.
I guess, because it is true that especially World of Warcraft players, like and the ones that maintain their subscriptions over the long term, that's like the game they play. So you're probably right that if you transition them over to Game Pass, it wouldn't be that they would get Game Pass and World of Warcraft.
They would just still pay the same amount to the same company.
Yeah.
They would just
but as in like there wouldn't be any cannibalization there of potential revenue where those same users would also get.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because to me, it makes sense if they wanted to do that. The subscription price might be slightly different, but it's like, well, you might be able to keep, bridge the gap and keep people during those lulls that normally you would lose.
Think about the time when it was just Netflix that was streaming content, right? So anybody who had something good would find some way to get it onto Netflix, right?
Yeah.
Before you had this giant diversity happen where now you got Peacock, HBO Max, blah, 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 right? Like everybody's got their own.
It's just Max now, Sam. Come on.
Oh, sorry, Max.
Yeah.
There is a benefit to having all this rolled up on the consumer side, provided, like you said, the enshittification is held at bay. For a while.
And so this is the problem with these monopoly moves is like, and so that's what I was saying. In the short term, I think this is great.
Yeah, right? Vertical integration is super nice.
Like I would love to just pay the same amount every month that I'm currently paying for WoW, but then also just have like a trillion other games that I can play too, But in the long run, what happens when the subscribers for Game Pass stop growing, right? Well, the price starts going up, right? as the price starts going up, like you'll just see the exact same process happen with what happened with the streaming services and all that.
I think it's a
kind of
little
stuff,
different though, because Microsoft has a really diversified set of income streams.
That's
right?
true. It is true.
And in particular, they've always subsidized their games division.
Mm-hmm.
And in particular, these days, their cloud computing stuff through Azure is their money making sort of system, right? And that's one of those things is like, at the moment, that's still one of the few things where like everybody wants more compute resources week over week, month over month,
Just all the time.
Just all the time.
Definitely be true. Yeah.
That is not. That's one of those few things, and of course, there's like the limitations of literal resources on the planet, which is kind of what we're running into, for that kind of a thing. But like, it's not a market really that's anywhere close to saturating. Yeah. And they've been able to really successfully, especially with Xbox, on Xbox, they've been on the losing end of the market wars, right? Repeatedly and consistently, kind of the whole time. They've had these few little windows where all of a sudden they were kind of on top for but
a year or two.
But that's been really rare for them. It's most like they've mostly been on the back foot, but it's okay. They use it as kind of a loss leader as part of their whole ecosystem. They can subsidize it with other parts of the company, and again, now that they have so much profit coming in through Azure, then they can just kind of subsidize everything and continue to sort of expand out and diversify stuff and really invest in these long scale and long term efforts and experiments to try to like corner something.
That is true. I think the enshittification problem mostly applies to if there's a company that has like one money maker.
Yep.
So like in the case of Google, it's their search, right?
In the case of
where
Unity,
it's like
I actually have Unity. I have a Google search story from yesterday.
Yeah, what happened? Did it get enshittified?
So all that happened was my wife and my phones stopped connecting to the Wi-Fi for some reason. Okay, but the computer still had it just fine, or rather, they were connected, but there was no internet for some reason coming through the phones. I was like, "What the hell?" And so I poked around with it for a little bit, couldn't figure it out, and then went and Googled. Hey, my phone doesn't connect to my Wi-Fi, but my PC does. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
All I got was literally the opposite.
Yeah,
but it's sponsored.
I mean, it doesn't even matter. Just the opposite. It was like just my phone's connected to my Wi-Fi, but my PC isn't. I'm like, literally, this is not what I asked.
This is not the problem at all.
Not the problem at all.
And I think that's always been true because that's the limitation of like that style of search. I think the problem is that now we're getting used to like ChatGPT style.
Well, so then I popped over to ChatGPT and I was like, "Hey, here's what's going on," and it was like, "All right, I got you. Here's 7 options," and I did the first 3, and then it was done. And I was like, "Thank you for understanding what the fuck was happening," and it's like just explained everything.
I think the reality is that Google's power as a search engine was never like the nuance and like accuracy of the search itself, because that's basically a pretty straightforward like language processing kind of a task that is like, because you could actually match like equivalent sort of search result accuracy with any just modern database that exists these days, right? The power of Google has always been the fact that they have indexed the whole fucking internet, right?
Yeah, so speed,
right?
Yeah, so that they can surface stuff, and that historically they've tried to find ways to not just rank things by accuracy, but rank things by sort of like proxies of trustworthiness, right? So that they could kind of use that as a way to get more and more accurate. Yeah, exactly. And the trustworthiness thing has been less and less possible to do to just get accurately. So that's part of why we're just seeing like worse and worse results and like kind of more of the same result rather than like a diversity of high ranking possible outcomes, right? So that's why you'll get 10 articles that all are the opposite of the question that you asked, right?
Yeah, because they have the words in it.
Yeah, because it got the words in it. And that's literally the best that it can do. And I think this is part of why it is getting worse, but it was actually just never that good.
It was the best,
but it was
never that good.
And it was good enough because like for so many of the kinds of things that you would search for, like stringing the words together is going to get you there, right? As long as there's good content on the internet that has answers to your questions, just a pretty basic natural language search is going to get you there, right?
Yeah, but we're definitely at the end of that. At the end of that paradigm, right? Like because the first paradigm shift was when we were young kids, we had to learn the Dewey Decimal System and learn, how to find stuff in libraries because that's where knowledge was, right? Like if you wanted to know something, you either just kept not knowing it or you would make a trip to the library and hope they had a book on it and then they didn't and then you kept not knowing it, right? And those were your two options.
Yeah, I remember doing research projects in like middle school and even in high school, where we'd you just literally
they wouldn't let you use the internet.
School library with like the 20 books that we had or whatever, and like I remember
you'd find like the one book on ancient Egypt or something, and then you would write a report on it. And it was like a 20-year-old book with a lot of bad ideas in it. But like, well, that's what you got. Yeah, so like there was a huge paradigm shift when search engines appeared. But yeah, it was a big issue at that time of how do you even like surface the info, and they were slow as shit, right? And Google's thing was they cached and indexed everything so that you got essentially instantaneous results, and they just did a better job of ranking it. And so, like search works well when you have a fairly constrained amount of information, right? And then like as the information balloons more and more and more, search just kind of reaches a point where things are so saturated that
it's also about noisiness, right? Because in the earlier days of the internet, like the internet was never a utopian, idealistic place full of only real truth, right? There was never people kind of like look back and think of it that way. It was literally never that. It was always as gross as it is today. But it used to be so hard to put things on the internet.
Garbage.
Yeah, it was just so hard to put things on the internet historically that it wasn't worth the effort of putting just infinite amounts of complete bullshit on the internet. So there still was lots of it, right?
Yeah, because there was a time when like blogs,
but now it's 99% bullshit because it's so easy to put bullshit on the internet, right? So it doesn't matter how good your search tools are if what they're searching through is 99% bullshit.
A lot of noise.
Yeah, because you got to find that tiny fraction of things. But then, of course, when you search, but like I assume, Sam, you typed that thing in, and then it was like, we found 53 billion results, right? I was like,
these are all not what I asked for, but okay.
Yeah, and so now we got it. Like we're at the that paradigm of handling information has already like hit its peak and run its course. Right. There's too much information out there, and you now need a synthesizer, not a searcher. And that's where, ChatGPT or Bard comes in or whatever. And it's also funny because people are like, well, like they hallucinate. You be careful. It's like,
have you read people's articles? Because goddamn.
People hallucinate. Google hallucinates. Everything.
The problem is if you treat, I think the core here is that things like a large language model is a text computer, right? It spits out the next most likely piece of text. That's its job. That's what it does, right? It's not an oracle. It's not a processor that gives you the truth, right? It just, based on its training set, just gives you the most likely next thing. And that's its whole job, right?
Which is usually what you want.
Well, that's the thing is that's also how people work. People also aren't oracles. People also don't just know the truth, right? They just assemble and spit out the most likely thing based on their training set, right?
Yeah.
So
I liked your approach, Adam, a while back when you were like, if I want to have ChatGPT do something, that I would treat it the same way as if I had a person do it.
Yeah, exactly.
It'll do it way faster and more, thoroughly and, all that stuff. But like,
but you don't trust it just because
you don't just blindly trust it. Like if somebody writes you up a report, you don't just go, perfect. I assume this is perfect and 100% factual and has no errors, right? Yeah. Like you would never do that, right? So, ChatGPT is the same way.
Yeah, I don't assume that from a news article that I read. Like, why would I? Like, it's written by a person. People are not trustworthy, right?
People have bias. ChatGPT has bias, right? Like it's
just the same.
Yeah. It's just a digital person that has the same flaws, right? Mm-hmm. So now before we get into questions, I just have one more thing to talk about with this Microsoft thing, which is the name.
Yeah.
Okay. Which I know, Sam, you wanted to talk about because
can we get a little more concise here, folks? All
right, so it was Activision and Blizzard and King as separate entities. Blizzard was actually owned by Vivendi for a while.
Yeah, that's that French conglomerate that owns like a million things, right?
Yeah. So Activision bought Blizzard from Vivendi, but because Blizzard's, so I believe that was an acquisition, not a merger, I believe. But because Blizzard's IPs were so strong and their company name was so strong, right?
Drop the name.
You don't want to drop it, so they merged the names together as Activision Blizzard. And then later when they acquired King, because King has Candy Crush, basically, right? Then
Literally, that's
once again, like, and also there's like
they
there's
could
a
have just
brand thing
called
where,
it Candy Crush. Could have been Activision Blizzard Candy Crush. Would have been the most accurate.
yeah. Well, this is what's kind of interesting is actually there's a segmentation of brands. So you kind of see like, for example, there's like these big conglomerates like Pepsi, for example, right? Like they have Doritos. Right. Which is its own entire brand that's separate from, say, like Pepsi, right? If you saw a beverage that was called Doritos, you'd be like, "What the fuck is going on?
What
here?"
happened?
Right? Or if you saw a bag of chips, it was like Pepsi on the chips, you'd be like, "This is wrong."
Is there liquid in this bag? I'm
Because
confused.
Pepsi means something and Doritos means something, right? So the same thing applies to like Activision, Blizzard, and King. Like if they were like, "Welcome to Activision's Candy Crush."
Yep.
That contaminates.
It's like Tom
the brand.
Clancy's.
Tom Clancy's Candy Crush, right? Because like Activision is like Call of Duty, basically. It's like hardcore games for college dormitory boys.
Well, I would say that ABK as a name is for investors. Like that's the only way it was used, right? It's like it's the legal and for investors name
because they do not use that language for.
Nowhere
players.
else.
It's-
Everywhere
it's-
else
they
you see
separate
Activision
that.
or Blizzard, right? And I want to note here because it was something I saw last month, and I double checked on my phone because just to make sure I got the number right because my mouth dropped open. Do you know what the lifetime revenue from Candy Crush has been?
I want to say 20 billion.
That's
maybe?
what it was. It was launched in 2012.
Yes!
It has made 20 billion with a B dollars.
That's
Yeah.
crazy.
I mean,
That's-
I remember reading because in its peak, I think it
Fucking-
made about $2 billion in 1 year.
Yeah,
And I think it did that for a few years.
Yeah.
yeah.
So you're telling me that it's made 20 billion and Microsoft just bought Activision Blizzard King for 70 billion. So Candy Crush is actually responsible for a third of that value.
No, because the sale price for an acquisition is only about future prospects, right? So it's like they're assuming that these three companies together, Activision, Blizzard, and King, have enough future earnings potential to more than compensate for a $70 billion
But the
cash outlay.
fact that Candy Crush alone, a single fucking
that much?
title over a decade, made $20 billion means that even if they just spent $70 billion to buy Candy Crush, like,
Hold on to
it
that
probably
bad boy
would have
for 3
worked out
decades,
okay
don't
after
it?
a few decades. Yeah.
Yeah,
crazy.
And so that's kind of the idea behind it. But yeah, so it's kind of weird because now my hope is that we no longer have to talk about Activision, Blizzard, King as one entity. Because why? I'm assuming that under Microsoft, Blizzard can just exist on its own. Activision can exist on its own. King can exist on its own.
And
they would all answer to
practically-
Microsoft.
Like Doritos.
Yeah, practically they
Yeah.
already do. Because the way that I think of it is basically ABK is the current Microsoft, right? As in ABK is the
investment.
parental
There's a
thing.
corporate level.
Yeah, but practically speaking, then there's just three separate organizations underneath it. So I think the ABK thing is going to just go away, and we'll just have.
I would hope so. Yeah.
It'll be back to having those three separate kind of.
Maybe change the name
IPs.
to Call of Diablo Crush,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Maybe that's-
Crush of Duty.
Yeah.
Actually, Crush of Duty is pretty good. That's a pretty good title.
Is it duty like duty or
Duty.
Duty
both.
there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, but something that whenever I feel like when I was a young lad and I didn't really know as much about how games are made. If I would hear about something like this merger of these big game companies, my immediate thought would be oh, that's fucking awesome. They're going to be able to combine their games in certain ways,
it's not
right?
gonna happen.
Can we get a Call of Duty style StarCraft game, or something, right? It's nope.
Although,
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that.
That's been one of the dreams though since StarCraft, right? It was
Oh yeah,
really good.
like an in-world first person
Yeah.
or third person, and they did work on StarCraft Ghost for quite a while. Blizzard did, which was supposed to be that almost like a Hitman style game where you play as a ghost from StarCraft, which is like a psychic sniper basically with a
Yeah, it could have been very cool.
who can call it nuclear orbital strikes.
Yeah, but the reality is they basically have the resources they've got still, right? And Call of Duty is just a money printing franchise. They're not going to take resources away from that to go, build a Blizzard themed version of the same thing, right? Because Call of Duty players don't want that.
Yeah, because the studios still exist, in their own They still have the same people. They're just now answering to the same person. So,
And nothing stopped them from doing that previously. Just, if
that's
they
true.
actually
At
wanted
any
to.
point, Activision could have called Blizzard and been like, "Hey, we want to make a StarCraft." Like this is what Baldur's Gate was, right? It's like the D&D people and Larian came together with the IP and made a D&D CRPG, right? Anyways, so it'll be interesting to kind of see what the actual implications are of this in terms of what happens with Game Pass and how these companies end up structured, all that. So, I mean, this was a 23-month merger.
Yeah,
So it'll probably take another couple of years before everything kind of shakes out. So,
Well, this was
if
also
anything comes up, we'll talk
honestly
about
the easy part because this is like a bunch of lawyers doing stuff, right? Which is not to say it's easy. I'm sure it was just a fucking.
I'm sure they made it very
horrible
hard for
thing.
themselves.
Yeah, well, like lawyers' jobs are going to make other lawyers' jobs hard, right? So it was going to be that,
and
kind
then
of a thing.
and then they each bill their own client while making life hard for the other lawyer.
yeah.
That's
so
it's a good gig.
A hard problem, definitely, right, at this scale. But the actual technical and organizational challenge of actually now merging these entities together or whatever, bringing ABK into Microsoft, whatever's going to happen, right? That the scale of that problem is so huge. I just can't imagine.
It's tens of thousands of employees, different countries, different states, different parts of the world, different languages, huge, deep organizational hierarchies, right? And then company cultures. I mean, it's wild.
Yeah, there's a reason why most of the time for mergers of this scale, what actually happens practically is no change, right? It's just kind of different overlords and maybe some like large scale changes, like what the money is and kind of some of the
strategic direction,
that kind of thing, right? But practically day to day, usually stuff kind of stays the same for a while because it's just way too hard to change these things.
Yeah, and honestly, like to me, the idea that this is even a concept is absolutely wild.
Yeah.
Because like when the concept of a corporation first appeared, it was a single purpose entity. So you would incorporate it in order to do a thing. So you'd be like, we want a charter to like build a railroad. So we're gonna form a corporation called like the Southwest United States Building 3 Railroads Company, right? You do that, you get your contracts, you do your stuff, and then the corporation would be disincorporated. It would be dissolved once it did the thing that it was created to do. But now the idea of like companies
are now people that live forever.
They're now immortal. You know, they're immortal and they only grow and they can like consume each other like a Gario and they just keep they keep consolidating and buying each other. It's also very strange, this idea that like legally corporations are people in terms of like protections
in
the US. But so they have free speech and stuff, but also they can be owned, which of course is not
so complicated
true of people. They can't go to jail. Oh man, the whole thing is absolutely fucking wild. So anyways, this is a huge merger. We'll see what happens. Let's get into some questions. These questions come from our listeners over at podcast.bscotch.net, and we haven't gotten to these in quite a while, so hopefully we can get through at least two, if not one.
Bold of you.
Okay.
That's bold, yep.
All right, first question comes from Glorious Cashew, who says, what do you think about Epic Games Store's new 100% revenue share for 6 months of exclusivity deal? Do you think it's worth it? Would you consider taking the deal?
As soon as they said, what do you think? I was like, well, this is the only question then.
All right, let me get my...
I'll keep it short. Yeah, I think it's a bad deal.
Not worth it.
Here's the thing. 100% of zero is zero. And I'm not going to say anything more than that.
I will.
Okay, go ahead. Do it.
Epic Games Store is still tiny compared to your alternative, which is Steam.
Unless you're Fortnite.
And they already only take a 12% cut.
Yeah.
So going from keeping 88% of your $12 a month that you were making off of the Epic Games Store to now you get all 12 of those dollars, not really gonna do anything. And of course, if you're exclusive, that means you're sacrificing actually making money on Steam or wherever else you were going to publish, right? So
exclusivity must be paid for.
Yeah.
Not
you got to buy it up front.
It doesn't make any it was. I saw that news and I was like, that's like the weirdest.
I would say though, if Steam said we have an 100% revenue share for 6 months exclusivity.
Oh Jesus!
No, I wouldn't even take that. Assuming the exclusivity meant only Steam and no other platform. Period. Right? If they said like you can't launch on mobile, you can't launch on Xbox, you can't whatever. I wouldn't take that deal with Steam, even though they take a 30% cut, and it's way bigger.
I would if I didn't have any other deals.
Yep.
Because
that's fair. I guess you could roll out your launch afterwards.
Yeah, and because Steam is the only platform today that you can just go make money on. And
it's hard.
You still can't most of the time, but it's the only one where that's even like
where you could
possible.
Yeah.
So if I didn't have guaranteed, like just launching on a store is not sufficient. So if I didn't have guaranteed income on the other stores, then I would gladly take 30, I guess, because when you're flipping it the other way, it's an extra.
It's almost
whatever.
It's almost a 50% gain in income off of Steam. So percentages are kind of wacky that way. Yeah, because the difference between making 70% and 100% of your money is like I was saying, mid 40% boost in revenue, which is huge,
enormous.
But the difference between making 88% of your income and 100% is basically a 12% boost. Basically,
yeah.
Right?
I think my main annoyance with like this Epic stuff is it's performative, because it doesn't actually. They're kind of doing it in a way where they're like, we're trying to like force the market to, and I agree with Tim Sweeney's general position that what he calls the store tax on all the different platforms is too high. 30% is just
too high.
Absurd. The value proposition is not high enough because like for a game company, your revenue comes from the game sales, right? Meaning 30% of all of your revenue, right, of your business is just owned by all the platforms, right? And they're providing an excellent service, and sometimes one we complain about a lot, right? But the main service of like making so people can get access to and buy the game, right? And resolving tons and tons of technical and regulatory and tax and all kinds of problems.
For me, it's the regulatory and tax stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Like I will happily pay 30%.
Well, that's the thing is like, it solves so many problems that like I can begrudgingly accept the 30%, right? But it is also true that none of these companies need to be taking 30%, right? And
also they ask for a tremendous amount on top of that. In terms of other. When Steam Deck comes out and they're like,
integrate our SDK and make sure it works.
Integrate your SDK, have it tested, and then we'll include it in Steam Deck stuff, and and it's like, oh god. And then Apple does the same shit all the time. Everyone's doing this where they're not just taking 30%, they're taking 30% and then making you do stuff,
adding lots of dev costs.
I admit that 30% is about the highest I would accept.
It's too high.
20% seems. Like to me, 12% seems suspicious. Like that's
15 to 20% seems like
20%. I feel like okay, but it's also strange. It actually reminds me a lot of tipping because it's like, all right, let's say I buy $1,000 bottle of wine, okay, and then the waiter goes and grabs it and brings it to me.
Swirl it a lot though. Pour it in your glass. Make it all fancy.
So nothing new happened compared to if I bought a $10 bottle of wine, right? Like buy a $10 bottle of wine, waiter goes, grabs it, brings it to me. $1,000 bottle of wine. Same shit. But when I buy the $1,000 bottle of wine, I have to pay the waiter $200 of tip for doing the same thing because I bought the expensive wine that the waiter had nothing to do with. Yeah. Right. So,
which to me
this is where I think it's strange because
that is a progressive tax. Actually, it's not even progressive. That's still a regressive tax because it's proportional. Because if you could afford a $1,000 bottle of wine, like I don't care. You have to pay.
Well, no. To me, it's a question of what are you paying for? Right? Are you paying for the service, or are you just giving money for no fucking reason? Right? Because like in the case of Steam, it's like, well, does their regulatory burden and other burdens increase? Like, do they have to do more of that stuff if our game sells 1 million copies versus if our game sells 100,000 copies? Like, no, the only thing that affects is their distribution infrastructure, is the
which
data
is
bandwidth.
Also, big, right? But it's not 30% of a game big.
No. Right. And so there's this strange thing where it's like there is a definite fixed cost that they have to incur regardless of the performance of games. And then there's like a very small variable cost that they incur by distributing the games, right? And the fact that the fee we pay them is proportional to the game sales, even though the service they offer is not proportional to the game sales in terms of like the costs they incur. That's where, to me, it's like that analogy of $10 bottle of wine versus $1,000 bottle of wine is that the service you're receiving is identical.
It's because they can, right? And that's the frustration, right? But when it comes,
that's where it's also parallel, right?
When it comes to the Epic stuff, though, it's like, to me, like it feels performative because they are so tiny in the market in the PC market, right? For being a game store, they're huge, like as a company because of Fortnite, right? But as a game store, they're tiny, and so they can just kind of say and do anything, and it doesn't actually matter in the market, right?
They got the benefit of being behind, right? So they can gamble and kind of throw their weight around whatever weight they have.
Well, they got
make a big scene.
It's not enough weight to do any boat docking.
It just doesn't really matter. And I just don't really believe, because it's still, they're not publicly traded, I don't think, but they have a lot of big money investors. And I don't believe for a second that if they were actually in a competitive spot in the market, that they would be pushing against the 30%. Right? The reason they're doing it is because they need a competitive advantage in the market because they don't have one otherwise. And I don't like it because, again, one, it feels performative, but more importantly, it can sucker people into bad deals. So this is actually, I specifically don't like this policy of like, hey, if you do because what I actually should say is, hey, if you come to our store, period, the first 6 months, we're not going to take any revenue share, or even we'll double your revenue is what it should actually be, right? Because
like a matching program.
Because they need people to come to the store, right? And the fact that they'll only do it in exchange for you not being on another store where you will actually make money, to me, is developer hostile. And they dress it up in this like developer friendly, like, look, we're going to let you keep all your money or give you more. Because actually the first time I read this, though I haven't looked in a while, I actually read it as they would basically give you 100% of revenue on top of what you made for the first 6 months in exchange.
Well, they can't do that because that's just way too cheesable, right? Because like you could just make 1,000 bot accounts and buy copies of the game and then double your money, right? So it's like they can't do any kind of a matching thing, but but if it's just like 100%, you're right. It's
again, like, to me, this is what I would call this developer hostile, and especially because it's going to be targeting indies, right?
Only people who don't know any better would take the deal, and then they'll be in a bad spot.
So I think it's bad. I don't like it. That's my position.
Agreed. All right, well, we can do another question.
Go.
We did it. Okay, next question comes from lexzap, who says, recently I have been hearing of the local first software movement. What are your thoughts on this new approach to software development?
Adam, what does this mean?
We read about this.
Yeah, we actually talked about this like a few weeks ago, right?
Because when we first
so
saw
this is interesting because this is what we've always done, and we didn't even realize that there was an alternative way of doing it.
Well, this is about web dev. Is like
my understanding of the local first thing is to sort of prioritize toward having the client do a lot of stuff.
And have the data available locally so that you don't have to always be online.
So, for example, in Levelhead, you can edit your levels and stuff, and you can play stuff while offline, right? Mm-hmm. You won't be able to like go to the tower and search for new levels because that requires us to do a database search, right? But all of your data, your campaign, your workshop, everything else is locally stored on your device so that if you boot up the game with no internet connection, you just play. And then we sync it with the web whenever you get a connection back. So my understanding is that's basically what this is, like this idea of local first.
But for web dev, because it is true also in games that people opt for like the online always sort of, right?
It's something I noticed that actually
web dev is like definitely does that. So, but
because like Baldur's Gate, for example, every now and then I would notice when playing, because I've rarely played multiplayer in Baldur's Gate. Almost all my playtime is single player. But I've noticed that every now and then, like an enemy would make a move at the end of a turn, and then nothing would happen for a few seconds, and then suddenly the animation would play as if there's server latency. And it turns out there is, because in order to make the game easily handle multiplayer, they just made the game always be processing things through the server. Right.
I didn't know like this was happening. I figured there's so much shit happening that it was kind of just lagging out.
Yeah, and it's weird because like you can still play it offline. So I don't know what that is, right? Like why would they do that if you're playing single player? But maybe it's just easier to just keep things synced with the server instead of like trying to sync them periodically or something.
Yeah, well, so I have a few. So when people get upset about always online, they, especially in games, they generally do it because there's the sort of assumption that there's a two-parter. One is there's an inconvenience because, of course, you want to be able to play offline, right? But the other one is there's an assumption there's something like nefarious going on, especially when related to like DRM and stuff, right?
Yeah, it's usually a bad faith feeling.
Yeah, and it's not that there's an absence of truth to that. It's that technically and like from a technology and just practical standpoint, if you're going to have online capability of any kind, there are a bunch of really hard problems you have to solve. And the collection of the hardest ones are resolving data conflicts, right?
Yeah. On my machine, I thought this thing was supposed to happen, but then the server says that something else was supposed to happen.
Well, actually, the worst problem, which is like, I played offline for 5 hours on my device, right? And then I went to a different device and
also offline
and played for 2 hours, right? And now I have basically two branches of the same thing, and now what do you do, right? Or if you're doing multiplayer stuff, like and somebody's device hitches for a bit, and you want them to still, or they have extra lag, or they do temporarily just like lose internet access or whatever. If they're still playing, then they're now playing where the whole world is deviating more and more from what everybody else is doing until you get resynced and everything goes again, right? So the easiest solution to that whole class of really hard problems
is to not solve them.
It's not solve them. Absolutely. And I don't even say this like facetiously, like it's a bad or lazy move.
No, it actually.
You got to understand, these are extremely challenging problems, and they're not solvable. Like there's not just like, oh, we've solved this, right? They are intractable problems that you can just do. There will always be holes in the solutions that you come up with because you're always choosing one thing over some other thing. It's always a push and pull on.
And if you have offline play and online play where you have this like caching and then syncing and catch up mechanism, that means that you still need to maintain all the server stuff to handle all the game's data. But now you also have this extra set of logic about how you're going to cache and sync the data. And every time you add a new game feature or new stuff that needs to be saved to the player's save file or whatever, you have to make sure you update both of those systems to handle it.
And this
is fragile.
Yeah.
Right?
So this is already an impossible, like really difficult undertaking.
It's very hard.
But it's exacerbated enormously by the fact that as soon as any of this logic is happening on the client, rather as in like the player's machine, right? Then a substantial, and especially in games, a substantial fraction of players will be fucking with that data, right? They'll be running various cheat engines. They'll be doing things to fuck with it, right? And that increases the amount of sort of desynchronicity happening, because now it means that no matter how good of a job you did, making sure that the server logic and the client logic match, the user is going to force them to mismatch, right? And now you have to figure out what to do with that, how to deal with that too. And you can't tell the difference most of the time between a bug in your code and a user fucking with the client side code, right? And so the burden now on you to deal with support tickets and your QA needs and all this kind of stuff goes way, 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 way up, because you're getting all these spurious issues that are really expensive. Because like any web thing, anything dealing with data being asynchronously moved around and like rejoin, all this kind of stuff, it's so hard to debug in QA that every time you add a new source where things can go wrong, the cost to you as the developer just goes up and up and up and up. And the time required to like deal with all of these goes up and up and up. And all of these things have to be then, because it's now in exchange for what? So now what are you not doing instead, right? So I used to, before I was a web developer, before
you understood the problem.
I used to have very hostile views towards always online stuff, right? Now,
it's easy to assume malice as
or
a
laziness
player.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, because you look at it as a player. Like I remember when Diablo 3 launched, and into their frenzy of Error 37 or whatever it was called, where like you would try to just play it single player, and you couldn't because their servers were overloaded. You can't log in, right? And it's like, what the fuck? This is a single player game. What's wrong, right? But what people don't realize is that like that single player game, you could
is also a multiplayer game.
Yeah, like you're playing it by yourself. but you could invite anybody else to jump into your game at any time.
Yeah.
Right.
But also, Seth, to your earlier point, the logic of the game has to exist server side to have multiplayer, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And if they wanted to also exist client side, it's not going to be exactly the same logic. It can't be because
they would have to code it up twice.
It has to be coded up twice.
Yeah.
It's
Which
just
again,
going
doubles
to be
the dev cost.
Yeah,
right.
it's just a lot more practical to make it always online.
Yeah, it's more practical, and it's like, well, there's an inconvenience layer to the player, but actually it's to a very specific subset of players at specific times, right?
Yeah.
Where like if you're on an airplane and you can't get any, except nowadays that's actually less and less true, right? Because
Wi-Fi on airplanes.
a lot of airplanes have Wi-Fi now.
Or if you're
traveling
rural, or if you're in parts of the world that have there's less internet connectivity. So there are real consequences to this, definitely. And so I don't want to downplay that either and say like it's just totally fine. It's kind of like it's like any accessibility issue, right? Like the fact that it's expensive doesn't mean it's fine to not do it, but it also is the practical explanation for why people don't, right?
Yeah, and you have to just ask yourself, like from a practical standpoint, if you are the decision maker and you're running this company, and you say, all right, well, 2.3% of our users will sometimes or often have a difficult time with the fact that we have this always online thing.
Yep. But to solve this, it's going to
solve it. We'll have to double our costs.
Yeah, it'll kick out our launch date by 30% or 40%, and increase our long-term maintenance costs by just 20%.
You would need to staff up QA. You would need to staff up your programmers. You would need much more rigid product management, and like you said, you need more time. Right?
I think really when people complain about what they're complaining about is a mismatch between what they perceive the game as at a baseline versus what the game actually is, which is like
technically.
Do I think that this is do I experience a game like Diablo as a single player game? Yes. I don't like. I actually don't. I very rarely played Diablo, any of them, even Diablo 2, back in the day, as like a play with friends thing, right?
Yeah, so it doesn't matter to you that they had to optimize everything for the multiplayer case.
Yeah, and the framing of it's not framed as a multiplayer game, as in like it's not.
It has multiplayer.
It has multiplayer.
It isn't multiplayer.
Which is true for a lot of games, right? Is that they have multiplayer. Like games are not usually multiplayer games, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's other stuff though, like that you don't think about. So, for example, if you fully uninstalled Diablo and then you reinstalled it 2 years later, you would expect your character to still be there.
Yep.
Why? Because it's online, right?
It's in the cloud.
So even though you've never played with anybody else, you're still taking advantage of all of these online services, right? That
and I think that's that core bit again is like it's trying to parcel these things out so that because it's just not the case that you can have complete. And actually, we talked about this. So I think like the game changer that we talk about a lot on the show which is our tool for managing content for Crashlands too, right? Is a good example of this too, right? Like it's a local first thing actually, right?
It lives inside of the game.
Yeah, it lives inside of the game, but so much of this is because we want to make sure we can work even if our internet goes down, right? But also just like practically, it makes sense for what the game changer is because the game changer represents all of the data that the game has access to, right? There's not so much data that could be in the game, but isn't always that we need like a remote database that has all of the data and then we just go fetch the parts that we need, right? That's not how it needs to work, right? But if you are Twitter, right? You can't download every fucking tweet that's ever existed locally, right? You can't download
you need a building. You need a building full of servers to hold
store all
data.
the tweets that exist, right? And I think, and if you are developing something that lives in this kind of weird space where you're like, some components of it are more like the game changer, some components are more like Twitter, right, or whatever. Some things are online like cloud saving, right? Some things don't strictly need to be like the generation of those saves in the first place. When you're in these like weird nebulous spaces, again, the complexity for allowing for both, it just gets extremely, extremely high really fast, but especially with something as complicated as like Diablo or World of Warcraft, right? Where just the sheer, because for those things to even work at all, you tend to break them up into what people call the microservices, right? But it's basically these kind of like pseudo independent little clusters of logic that you can kind of scale up and down independently that handle certain kinds of tasks. And then you just have ways of like having them all talk to each other. Right. And these are huge problems people are solving. And so I guarantee you, there's not a single person at like Blizzard who knows how every part of the web tech that manages World of Warcraft works, right?
Yeah, in a weird way, this is the heated seats problem all over again, right? Because like they had to manufacture 2 different kinds of seats, which actually ended up being way more expensive. And they're like, it's actually cheaper if we just make if we only make the more technically complex thing, rather than both the technically complex thing and the simple thing at the same time, right? Or it's like, Batman when his car busts apart and turns into a motorcycle, right? Remember that shit?
Yeah.
It's like, well, imagine if you had that and you're like, well, we want to make some changes to the motorcycle.
Yeah,
well, you can't do that unless you also make changes to the car because they're part of the same thing. You know?
I think that's actually that core point, right? Is if you have a complicated system because you need that complicated system, and there is a simpler thing that you could also do. Also doing a simple thing just makes the complicated thing more complicated, right? It doesn't
because you're not because you're just doing 2 things now.
Yeah, which is to summarize my answer to all of this stuff. I get the impetus for like local first, right? And I also like it. I like the idea that like it doesn't matter if stuff goes offline. I don't like being beholden to remote infrastructure that could stop working at any moment, all this kind of stuff.
I like it as a consumer, not as a developer.
Yeah, exactly. I don't like it as a developer. And again, practically speaking, I'm just kind of accustomed to the idea now that like everything that I do just requires the internet to work. It just
whatever
does. I can't get emails if the internet doesn't work because how could I? That doesn't even make sense, right? I couldn't chat with people if it doesn't work because again, how could I? It doesn't make any sense. There are certain things that I want to make sure generally work offline. Like I want to be able to edit code offline, that kind of stuff, right? But I don't need to be able to sync things offline because again, doesn't make sense, right? But because I am there, like there's a new kind of paradigm in programming where you're seeing this happening too, where GitHub and a bunch of other services are offering basically a development computer in the cloud that you're now talking to through your browser or through other kind of a client, right? But where everything is actually happening there instead of on your machine.
You're basically remoting in.
Yeah, you're basically remoting in. That's just somebody else's machine. And that does have tons of cool advantages, right? You can be on a shitty machine now talking to some amazing machine, right?
You can now have
10 people. Yeah,
machine.
exactly. Yeah. Talking to the same machine, which is also very cool, right? But of course, also, if your internet goes down, you're toast, right?
I say it requires this Venn diagram of somebody who has great internet but a terrible machine, right? Like that's to really want this.
Well, actually, that's the interesting thing is that more and more like people having a rig is just less and less true over time, right? Developers are the most likely to have, or PC gamers are by far the most likely to have a rig, right? And
for some reason, developers carry around 13-inch MacBooks. I don't know what that is.
Yeah, well, especially web developers are only using Macs, basically, right? Game developers are using rigs because you need a rig to make games, right?
Just the idea of like spending 8 hours on a laptop. Like, do you hate your neck? Do you just want to fuck your neck right up?
Yeah,
do that.
One of the web dev podcasts I listen to, they have a guest basically every week, and they have a set of questions they always ask at the end, which includes like, what is
one of them? How's your neck?
It's what's your setup, right? And the fraction of people who just work on a MacBook fucking laptop with no bells and whistles, right? And are like building entire companies, doing this is
they got to be in their 20s because like
they're all fairly young, their 20s and 30s.
I programmed Crashlands on a laptop at Sam's apartment for the most part. Well, I'd say about 3 days a week, and then like a couple days a week I would be at my place with my actual.
Yeah, my first year and a half of work with Butterscotch in Dallas was also on a laptop, and then I would like fly into St. Louis once every 6 weeks or whatever. With my laptop and set up on somebody else's desk or whatever.
And the thing is, like, so at that time, around the time we launched Crashlands, I was in my late 20s and like
still relatively cartilaginous.
Yeah, and when we started Crashlands, I was in my mid 20s, right? So like working on a laptop at the start of Crashlands, no problem. By the time we launched the game,
catching up.
I was like, man, I hope this game makes some money so that I can get something
take care
ergonomic.
Of your joints, kids. If you're doing art, take care of your wrists. Okay, I can't stress it enough. Take care of your fucking wrists. If you're doing laptop stuff, I don't know, man. Just spring for something to help your neck.
The thing that I would never understand about laptops is why they would not. It's like you got your Surface, the Surface tablet thing, right? Which has like a detachable screen. No laptop has a detachable screen that also has the ability to be elevated.
Yep.
Yeah. Like, why can't I take the screen off and raise it? If I could do that, I would use a laptop. But the fact that the screen has to be 2 feet below my eye line while I hunch over it like a gremlin.
Either your arms can be comfortable, either your wrist can be comfortable, or your neck can be comfortable, but never both.
You never get to,
never
with
both.
a laptop. Yeah. So somebody get on that. I would pay a subscription service for that shit. If I could get a telescoping
Hydraulics for my
Yeah, for my monitor.
If you add up because it is a hilarious thing, right? Because really ergonomics for working on a computer is all about it's the relative distance between the floor to the seat of your chair and the floor to the top of your desk and the chair to the top of the desk and like how thick your legs are and how tall your legs are and stuff, right? But basically, there's a few different distances though. It's like floor to desk and then desk to keyboard because there's different ways of putting a keyboard on.
How thick is your desk?
Yep. How thick is your et cetera. Yeah. And then desk to monitor, right? And then you come in and you position yourself relative to all of that stuff, right? But when all of those things can move independently, that's the only time you can control your actual ergonomics for your own body, right? But it's all, like if you think about it, like we all have similar kinds of setups, right? But like we have these ergonomic robot arms, right? That allow us to position our monitors.
Not on our bodies, but attached to our monitors.
Attached to our desks, right? So that our desk, so that the distance between our desk and like the top of the monitor, we can just adjust however we want, right? And we all have standing desks that can be moved to any relative height position, right? So the distance between the floor and the desk is also independently mobile, right? And this is the only way that as a person in your like 30s and up that you can survive doing this long term.
Working 8 hours a day on a fucking
every now and then I hear like our dad will say something like, I don't know how you guys spend all day on the computer. Like I'm on there for like 30 minutes and I just got to get the fuck out.
Have you seen his setup? It's the least ergonomic thing in the
you're
universe.
working on a laptop on like a high top sort of like hardwood desk that's used for like writing by hand where it's like you actually want it to be raised higher, but like ergonomics for a computer is like lower desk, higher monitor, but basically everything that a laptop and high desk is not. It's just the opposite, right? It's like, I can understand if I was working on that setup for 30 minutes, I'd probably just, I wouldn't make games anymore at all. I'd just die.
Just weep.
Yeah. So it matters. But anyways, what was the question? Oh, local first. Yeah, local first. It's whatever. It's complicated.
I like the motivation. I think it's a good kind of a goal, but I also think most of the time it is the nuance related to the question is actually important. And I would actually say that most of the time, I would prefer to get a product out with more features and fewer bugs.
Which might just require
better maintenance, which if it requires any online component at all, may just require it to always be online. And I would mostly prefer that because of the reduction in complexity of the tool overall. And I want the tools that I'm consuming to be likely to work for the long term. And the more complicated those tools are to develop and create and maintain, the less that's true. So
that's an argument in either direction, basically. Right.
It's kind of an argument for not local first, actually, if anything. Right?
If it has web components, then if it's always online, it's a simpler product to expand, and that's better in the long run. And if you ever end up without internet access, well, take a break, take a day off, read a book, go for a walk. It's okay.
You've been outside? It's pretty out
Not lately, but like I'm sure it's great out there.
it's pretty great out there now. For a while,
I was out there this morning.
It's not great.
Oh wow,
nice.
Great. Yeah. So you could just go outside for a moment. Just take a breather.
Touch some grass.
That's all. Yeah, touch some grass. That's all the time we have for this week. We'd like to thank our producers Fat Bard and Sampa DeCosta for putting the podcast together, and thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the podcast archives. And as always, if you'd like to help us get some visibility on Crashlands 2, which is our upcoming game, you can head on over to Steam, just look up Crashlands 2 and give it a wish list. We'd appreciate it. It will boost the visibility of the game in the store, and that helps us out a ton. So thank you very much. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.